Hey everybody, it's me. Sorry I can't be with you today. We are taking Noah back to college down in SoCal. And if you know anything about the Thanksgiving weekend traffic, we decided to bug out way early so that 6-hour trip doesn't become a 14-hour trip. We did that once, by the way. We left on a Sunday evening. We took the kids to Disneyland after Thanksgiving. Oh my goodness, don't do that. So anyway, we learned our lesson and decided to bug out early. But I wanted to start off this new series called Giving Christmas, and it's kind of a combo, a little segue between the last one we were at, which was Animate Practices, and a whole Christmas theme, which I'm pretty excited about. As pastors, we got to come into the narratives of Christ's birth again and again every year and somehow make it fresh. And some years I'm like, oh man, how in the world can I do anything different than I've ever done before? This one's got an interesting little caveat to it, so I'm actually looking forward to this season and sharing some stuff with you. So let's just jump right in. I don't know about you, but I noticed somewhere around mid-October or so, mixed in with Halloween contests from Frozen figures from the movie to maybe Iron Man and some of those Avenger type costumes. Already in mid-October, they were sneaking in some Christmas decor kind of stuff. A little Christmas tree here and there, some ornaments here and there, some red and green stuff, wreaths and that kind of stuff. And we've always lamented this year after year. It seems like they push it back further and further. Or when is Christmas going to start next? And maybe it'll start in June somewhere. Who knows? And this year is not unlike other years where there's a fabricated war on Christmas that's happening, and Starbucks, boy, they must have had their game on early because they came out with a full assault. I mean, how dare they offend us, Christmas celebrators, with giving us just a simple red cup. I mean, my goodness, could I be more offended that Starbucks gave me just a simple red cup for this Christmas season? I don't know if I'm going to get over this one. Of course, if you've ever been in Starbucks recently, you'll notice all kinds of Advent things there and all kinds of Christmassy stuff. But nope, I'm sure they are leading the charge on this year's war on Christmas. But don't get me started on that. Let's talk about something more positive. If we think that starting Christmas in October is early, then maybe we should jump back to the first Christmas that ever happened and see how early Joseph gave a gift to Mary. So let's check out the text today. This comes from Matthew, and hopefully you can see this. I'm thinking you can. Pretty confident. So in Matthew's Gospel, this is how Jesus the Messiah was born. By the way, when we read this, in years past I've talked about the historical accuracy of this text, and there's a lot of debate in scholarship about, well, did this really happen or not happen, or did it come on as a later edition? That's all interesting stuff, but I don't really want to go there this year. Not because I'm afraid to, obviously, I've done it before, but because I want to be a little bit more Eastern about this. I want to take in the story, I want to revel in the story, I want to immerse myself in the story and take you with me and see what we can see, because it's an incredible story. And the truth of the story really isn't dependent on the historicity of the story, if you get me on that. And that's a very Eastern way of thinking versus a Western way, which is, it's literal, we have to take it that way, it's written in black and white, therefore it must be true or not. And so anyway, that's where I'm going with you. So let's just jump into the story and enjoy it for what it has to offer us. So Matthew starts off, this is how Jesus the Messiah was born. His mother, Mary, was engaged to be married to Joseph. But before the marriage took place, while she was still a virgin, she became pregnant through the power of the Holy Spirit. Joseph, her fiancé, was a good man and did not want to disgrace her publicly. So he decided to break the engagement quietly. This is the first gift of Christmas, and it really is a gift. Joseph chose to serve Mary in a special way. And what I don't mean that he chose to serve her papers. I mean, he kind of was planning on doing that. But what I mean is he chose to serve her with great grace and dignity. He was compassionate. He really gave her, if you think about the fruits of the Spirit that Paul talks about later in the New Testament, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness and goodness and self-control. These are the fruits of the Spirit. It's like all of these things were wrapped into this generous gift that Joseph gave Mary. Just remember, back in that day and age, Joseph would have been the one who had the right to call Mary out, call her a liar, call her a whore in front of the whole community. And he had the right to call for her being stoned to death. Whether or not that would have happened is another thing, but Joseph could have gone sideways on Mary, and he didn't. He decided to live up to his good name, and he chose to give her a gift of letting her go quietly. Didn't mean it was going to be an easy row to hoe for Mary, for sure, but he let it go and was going to let her go, and that's a beautiful gift that he gave her. And that's kind of where I'm jumping off on this giving Christmas, is he didn't have to. It cost him something, cost him pride, but he gave her something that was very profound, very significant, especially to her. It made all the difference to Mary. I mean, it was life and death for her. And he did that for her. And because of that, we're here still celebrating Christmas, red cups and all. Well, as he considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream. "Joseph, son of David," the angel said, "do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. For the child within her was conceived by the Holy Spirit." And I love this last line. "And she will have a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins." Now Matthew goes on, gives us a little side commentary. He says, "All of this occurred to fulfill the Lord's message through his prophet. Look, the virgin will conceive a child, she will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel," which means God is with us. Now Matthew, the writer of this gospel, man, did he love to look back at prophecies and stuff. And so we see him starting right out. Actually, this isn't in the beginning. He goes back, and in the lineage of Jesus, he lists all kinds of interesting things. But he wants to make sure we have this. And just a little historical footnote on this. Very likely, when this first came into the scripture, this comes from Isaiah chapter 7, by the way. At that time, they were not thinking Messiah at all. At all. It was a story about the Jewish nation being torn in two. You had Israel to the south, Judah to the north. They were not getting along well, and the king of Judah heard that the king of Israel and the king of Syria were going to come together in an alliance, and they were going to come against Judah and wipe him out. And he was terrified. And Isaiah the prophet goes, "Hey man, I got a text from God, and this is what I heard." It says, you're somebody that you're related to, probably your daughter, maybe it'll be your own child, we don't know. But by the time that kid is born, within short order, you're going to say, "God is surely with us." You're going to look at that kid and say, "Emmanuel," because God is with us, because we're not dead. So that was the original context of this prophecy. They weren't thinking at that time of a distant Messiah. But when we look back to Scripture, we recognize, okay, this was a time when things were very scary, when it looked like the world was going to come to an end. And because something happened, because something shifted, everybody says, well, wait a minute. It turns out God was with us anyway, because we're not all dead. And in fact, things are quite alive. So that happened there, but there are some language issues here that we need to touch on for a moment, and they're pretty cool. So I want to talk about 3 different words here, because Jesus came to give something at Christmas himself. He came to give himself. Did you know, if this could be review for you, but Jesus, which is the Greek version of Joshua, which is the Hebrew version, literally means the Lord saves. The Lord saves. That's what Jesus' name means. So in essence, you have him saying, if you look at the previous screen, he will have a son, you're to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. So the guy whose name means the Lord save is going to actually save his people from their sins. You know, a lot of times when we look at that phrase, I'm going to go back to that in a second. A lot of times when we look at just this line, he will save his people from their sins, because of our context and everything that's been taught us, we go to a certain place when we see a couple of these words. First of all, we think Jesus, we kind of got him figured out, we know who he is. But when we see that word save his people from their sins, because of our time in history and because of church history, when we see that, we immediately think to the cross. We think, okay, somehow God is going to pull this thing off with Jesus, going to die on the cross, it's going to be some kind of a sacrifice, it's going to satisfy God's wrath, and our sins will be forgiven. And that's naturally where a lot of people go because of church tradition and where the church has been for the last 200 years or so. But if we settle on that, not that that's insignificant, because it's very significant. I'll get to that in a little while, but you got to recognize that that word save is a little bit bigger than that. In fact, the word save literally means to heal and restore. That's what save means. So if we think about Jesus coming to save the people from their sins, what he's really saying is that this Jesus, whose name means the Lord saves, he's going to come heal and restore people from their sins, which leads, of course, to the next question. Well, what is sin then? And a lot of times, because of our time in history and what we've been taught, we think sin is like this big laundry list of stuff that we've done, stuff we've thought about doing, that God is keeping track of. And as soon as we die, God's going to pull out the big clipboard. Maybe yours is this big, mine's going to be about this big, of all the stuff we did or thought about doing that was wrong. And if we haven't been saved, if we haven't been forgiven, then, too bad for us. God's wrath's going to come down to us, and we're toast. That's kind of the way we think about sin, but that really doesn't capture it. If we could get back into the first century and have a conversation with Jesus and the rabbis about the meaning of the word sin, what is it really? What's it about? Is that really all God cares about? Is just a big to-do list and a to-don't list? Or is it more than that? Well, it is more than that. I've told you before a fancy definition. This is a little bit easier to swallow. Sin is simply this. Sin is what is not shalom or peace or harmony or whole. In a sense, sin is everything that is not reflective of God, if you can think about it that way. So, if sin is what is not reflective of God, shalom, peace, harmony, wholeness, and Jesus came to save us from our sin, then this is really what we're getting. Is Jesus came to heal and restore us from all that is not shalom, peace, harmony, wholeness. He came to restore us. He came to look at everything in our life that was messed up, broken for all kinds of reasons, physical, emotional, spiritual, all that stuff. And he came to restore us. He came to bring back shalom, to reconnect us with God. That's what save the people from their sins means. It's not just a forgiveness of sins by some act on the cross. It's that his very life was going to be spent doing this very thing. It's pretty cool stuff. Well, that was kind of different than what people thought. In fact, I mentioned when you watched this a couple weeks ago that when John the Baptist baptized Jesus, Jesus was baptized into the baptism of John the Baptist, which was hey, this is going to be a start of a new chapter in my life. I'm saying goodbye to some of these things. It was a cleansing, it was a renewal kind of experience, and Jesus got in on that. John the Baptist eventually was arrested because his acts were seen as acts of insurrection. And he said a few choice things about the king in Judah at that time, which were very popular with the king or his wives. So problems there. But anyway, he's in jail and he hears about what Jesus is up to. And the things that he hears about what Jesus is up to do not make sense to what he thought Jesus was going to be about. They're incongruent. See, John had expectations, like a lot of people had, about what it was going to look like when the Messiah would show up. And it basically looked like this, that the Messiah would show up, have all kinds of God all over him, he'd kick some serious Roman butt, and place the Jewish nation back on the top of the food chain. And everybody would bow down to Israel at that point. That was the idea of what was going to happen. There's going to be a lot of military action probably. And so John gets reports that there's no military forming. In fact, just the opposite. All kinds of other things are happening. John was expecting one type of revolution when Jesus was bringing a different kind of revolution. So John sent his disciples to ask Jesus straight up, are you the Messiah or not? Because maybe I was wrong, John's thinking to himself. And so Jesus hears the question, and this is what he did. So Jesus came to make us whole again. That's kind of what he's doing. And so he's asked this question, are you the Messiah or not? And so Jesus says back to his disciples, John's disciples, go back to John and tell him what you have seen and heard. The blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised to life, and the good news is being preached to the poor. Now, you and I hear this and think, okay, well, that's neat. But if you're John, at first glance, you're going to be like, but where's the militia? Where's the offensive attack, on Rome? But the more he sat there and thought about this, he had time to sit and think about this, thought about this whole idea of Jesus coming to make us whole again, of healing us and restoring us from what is not of God. This starts to communicate a lot. Remember, back in that day, in antiquity, if you were blind, if you were lame, if you had leprosy, if you were deaf, if you died unexpectedly, all of these things were evidences of sin, maybe in your life or somebody you knew, and evidence of God's wrath against you. So when Jesus comes, and all of a sudden he's healing people of these physical problems that people were sure were signs of God not being happy with them and stuff that they did wrong, their sins, when Jesus is counteracting that, he is living up to his name, and he's living up to the prophecy. He came to save, restore people from their sin. He's really doing it, and it's pretty cool. And John eventually started to get this, that this is the revolution that's happening. By the way, these are physical things that are happening, but you and I both know that physical problems aren't the only problems we deal with. If only physical problems were the only problems we deal with. Much more severe are the emotional things that we go through in life. Those are the things that actually sometimes even cause the physical things to begin with. And those kind of heartache things that happen, the things that are told to us that jack with our mind, all that stuff, that's also not reflective of God. It's a brokenness that we have. That's stuff that is not of God. It's not shalom. It's not peace. It's not harmony. We become broken. And Jesus came to do something about that. And he did it in his ministry. There's stories where he brings people to the table that were not welcome at the table. And when he did that, he lifted them up. He gave them hope. The woman caught in adultery, he forgives her. He gives her a new lease on life. He says, hey, leave this life behind. There's a better life for you if you'll have it. The tax collectors, who everybody hated, Jesus said, we're doing dinner tonight. You can even throw a party for me and I'll meet all your friends. I mean, that's emotional healing kind of stuff that changes your life in ways that we often don't even appreciate until much later in life. So Jesus is actually getting this thing done. He really is healing and restoring that which was not of God. He's making people whole again, physically, literally, and stuff that you can see with your eyes. But then also internal stuff that you might not notice at first glance, but you can see it in somebody's eyes. This was the revolution. This was the gift. This is what giving Christmas is all about. You think about Christmas as a celebration of Christ's birth. Well, what I'm suggesting here is there's a way to bring the birth of Christ into our time right now. And the way we do that is by following in the footsteps of Jesus, which means we're the hands and feet that seek to heal and restore and save people from their sin, their brokenness, their lack of wholeness, all this stuff that represents what Jesus came to work against. So, a little later on in the story, actually much later on in the story, toward Jesus' death, they're just about to go into Jerusalem, and some of the guys still aren't getting it. They're still thinking this is going to be military. And we're going to finally go in. It took it 3 years to finally get to Jerusalem, and now they're there. And now it's going to be the real fireworks show. And Jesus is hanging out, probably on his own. And Matthew tells us this story. He says, then the mother of James and John. This is interesting, by the way, because in the Gospel of Mark, it's just James and John. So apparently, Matthew wanted to make James and John look like complete incompetence, so they're going to have their mommy come and make a request for them. So the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus with her sons. So they're standing there, and she knelt respectfully to ask a favor. What is your request? He asked. She replied, in your kingdom, please let my 2 sons sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left. Not as big a thrones as you have, Jesus, much smaller thrones for sure, but just make sure they're right there next to you. You know what she's asking? She's saying, can you functionally let my boys be the princes in the next world? because that's what we're really looking for. Or in this kingdom that you're bringing, because I would really like that as their mom. I'm so proud, and I could tell you all kinds of wonderful things about how awesome they are, and et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of a crazy thing to ask. And Jesus catches it, and he says, but Jesus answered by saying to them, you don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering I am about to drink? Oh, yes, they replied. We are able. Us who know the story, we're like, you guys are idiots, right? So Jesus told them, well, you will indeed drink from my bitter cup, and they did. But I have no right to say who will sit on my right or my left. My Father has prepared those places for the ones he has chosen. Now get this, when the 10 other disciples heard what James and John had asked, they were indignant. I'm not sure this quite captures how the other disciples felt. Some of them are like thinking, how dare they ask such a thing? And other of the disciples are thinking, how come we didn't think of that? Maybe we could have gotten the smaller thrones on the right and the left. But Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many, to pour out his life, to deal with this sin issue, this thing which was not of God, and to bring healing and restoration wherever he could. This is the mark. This is what it looks like. This is what giving Christmas is all about. That we come and we give the best that we can to a world in need, because it needs it. Your challenge is to figure out, how are you going to actually live this out? So my question for you is, what are you serving up this Christmas? Are you just going to buy gifts and let another Christmas season pass you by where you get to December 26th and you're exhausted and broke and wondering where the time went? Or are you going to do something different this time? Who is in your oikos? Well, this is a cliffhanger. I'm going to tell you what your oikos is in fuller detail next week. But I am going to ask you today about how you can serve them. You'll get some hints on this. I love this quote by Teresa of Avila, by the way. She said, Christ has no body here on earth but yours, no hands but yours, no feet but yours. Yours are the eyes which express Christ's compassion to the world. Yours are the feet with which Christ is to go about doing good, and yours are the hands with which Christ is to bless us now. This is what giving Christmas is all about. Here's the thing. You and I, Christmas can be a very stressful time. I think there's a way to bring hope back to Christmas, and I don't think it has anything to do with the color or design of Starbucks cup. I think it's with how we approach Christmas. And I think if we take the lead of Joseph and recognize that we have something to do, even if we may not feel like it at the moment, that there is a gift that we can give that will make a big difference, then it's worth giving it. And the cool thing is, this doesn't really cost money, maybe a little bit of money on some occasions. It's mostly just about being present and choosing to be like Jesus, to give ourselves to the world like Jesus gave himself to us. And so here's the idea. I want you to think, this is related to your oikos, by the way. It's a Greek word which means your community or your family even, your neighborhood. I want you to think about the people that you interact very frequently with. Could be your coworkers, could be your family members, could be people at school, could be friends through whatever activity you're doing, but who are those people that you see on a fairly regular basis? First thing I want you to think about this week as we jump into full Christmas swag and sway this week, is I want you to check in with them and just see how they really are. Because if you really do interact with them a lot, you probably already kind of know what's going on in their life. But then on the other hand, we live very busy lives, and it's entirely possible that you could be doing a lot of time with somebody in life and not really know how they are. So my first challenge to you is serve them by caring enough to find out how they really are. Now, be wise here. If you go up to one of these people and say, hey, how you doing? They're going to say, okay, or great, or fine. And that may not be the case. And so what I want to encourage you to do, and this is going to take a little bit of time, but I'm going to tell you now the payoff is worth it, is I want you to build a little bit of time into your day so that when you see that person and ask them, how are you doing? And they say, okay, you don't call them a liar, but you say, well, that's awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. And then follow it up with a couple more questions about whatever's going on in their life. Well, how's work going? How are you feeling about that? You still liking your job? Or how's your family? How are they doing? And start poking some questions in there. You're not asking for, you're not going to violate the HIPAA Act or anything here, so you're not going to ask them how their whatever disease is going. That's not the point. But you're asking them, much more carefully, with care, how are they really? And I guarantee you, just by doing that simple act of listening, you're going to make somebody's day. And the cool thing will happen when you do that. And this is just with the people that you already know. Cool thing that'll happen right then and there is their day is going to be a little bit brighter because someone slowed down enough to actually care. They may have been a little bit broken, a little bit, whatever, kind of frazzled. And when you come in as the presence of Jesus, just by simply loving them and giving the gift of time and compassion to listen, you change their day. And you don't change it for the worse. You make it a little bit better because you cared. And so that's my first encouragement. That's the first thing that I think you can guarantee that'll happen. The second thing is something that you probably won't realize is happening, but because you showed care and concern and compassion to your oikos, those people that are already in your neighborhood, so to speak, in your community, in your family, that's going to change their day and their approach with other people. There's a ripple effect that does happen. When you brighten somebody's day, they're going to end up being a little bit brighter for somebody else's day too. It's a beautiful thing. But the third surprise is one that we can't go after. We can't seek this out, but it happens nonetheless. And that is that we end up benefiting from our act of charity. Giving Christmas, we often, or at least the way I'm thinking about it, our first thought is how do we give Christmas to somebody else? But the funny flip side of this thing is that when we do this Jesus stuff with other people, Christmas gives back to us. It becomes a giving Christmas to us because that's how it works. It's a beautiful, wonderful thing. And by the way, you can't cheat this thing. So if you're writing down notes, which I'm sure all of you are, if you're writing down notes, you're saying, okay, go ask somebody how they're doing and really mean it this time. And you're thinking, okay, all I got to go do is this because that's what Pastor Pete said to do. And you go do that and you really don't give a rip about anybody. You're just trying to fill a requirement or something. It's going to totally blow up in your face. It's probably going to go the other direction, in fact. Whoever you're asking is going to be like, you don't even care, man. You're already looking at your phone while you're asking me, how I'm doing. And you're going to darken their day, and they're going to darken somebody else's day, and you're not going to be any better for it either. Your day is going to get a little darker because you're going to be like, I knew Pastor Pete was full of baloney. This didn't work at all. Well, that's because your heart has to be in it. This has to be something that emanates from the very heart of God because this is a God thing. And so recognize that when Jesus did this stuff, when Joseph did his gift of charity to Mary, and wanting to divorce her quietly, even though he never even went through with that, those are things that are of God. Those are things that show compassion and grace. And when we extend that same kind of a thing, when that's our heart, beautiful things happen. We can only expect it because that's just how it works. The other group that I want you to think about, they're probably not in your oikos. They're not in your community, your neighborhood, your family kind of a thing, even though you might see them often. These could be, the person who checks you out at Target or at Safeway or Walmart. This could be a librarian that you see when you go check out a book. Could be whoever's ringing you up at Costco that you see fairly regularly. There's this gal at Costco that since we go there so often, she knows my name and she's known it for like 15 years. Hi, Mr. Shaw, every time I go in there. It's really wild. Her name is Rose. So I need to do this for Rose somehow, some way. Here's the idea that for somebody you really don't know, do something special. Do something to brighten their day. It might even be your barista at Starbucks, even though they're serving with those terrible red cups that are highly offensive to us sensitive Christians. So here's what you do. Figure out some way to do something nice for them. It could be just a little nicety. It could just be a moment where you're at the checkout stand and they're ringing you up and you literally look them in the eye and say, so how's your day going? And you keep looking in their eye so that they know that you're actually asking, or how are you? And you're not looking for a 10-minute conversation, but just that interaction that says, I recognize you, you're an actual human being, and we're sharing the same airspace together, and you matter. That goes a long way. Maybe when you're at the barista and you get your Starbucks and you have that kind of exchange, then you buy a $5 gift card. And the guy who's asking for money at the edge of the parking lot, or the woman, then you give them that $5 gift card. And they can go have something hot to drink when it gets a little cool outside. These are random acts that, again, go a long way, and they're going to do more for you than they are for them. This is what giving Christmas is all about. And a beautiful thing that will happen with this, we have this beautiful little Christmas tree here, if I can get back here in time. Almost there. Here we go. All these things here are the fruits of the Spirit. When you do this giving Christmas kind of stuff, these things become more a part of your experience. When you choose to follow Jesus, when you choose to walk with Christ, when you're compassionate like that, these things just kind of come on our branches. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and self-control. These are beautiful fruits of the Spirit. If you want more of that in your Christmas, make your Christmas a giving Christmas. I look forward to seeing you next week. I'll be out watching Noah at a performance later on this week, and I'll be back on Sunday to take you to round 2. Thanks for coming, and we will see you next week.